compared to what you've been through, the challenge that you see ahead of you right now is nothing. I love that idea. Look at the challenge. Look at the thing that you're worried about right now, the challenge, the obstacle in front of you, and just take a moment and just recognize what you've been through to get to where you're at right now. And look at that challenge and you'll recognize it's nothing. Unbelievable what we've all been through. This rise up is called Neither Here Nor There. And you are going to love it.
Great morning, world! Welcome to the Rise Up with Dragon podcast with your host, Dragon!
Great morning, world. It's your boy, Dragon here. Just back from a trip. Very excited about being back in the saddle and doing this rise up. This rise up is called Neither Here Nor There, and you are going to love it. But before I jump into that, I just want to share a little bit of experience of what I've just gone through. I've just, Chicken and I got on a plane and we went to Colorado for a live event. So we're getting back into these live events. This was a very unique event. First of all, Chicken and I, are in the throes, getting ready to leave now for South Africa, but we're actually seriously considering packing the family up and moving out and getting a place in Colorado. So it's very fun for us to go out there. We're thinking about raising our daughter Ducky in Colorado. So anyway, that was going on. That was fun. But I had the opportunity and the honor to speak at this event called the Purple Explosion that was hosted by big shout out to Greg Kimball, his wife Kayla, and the folks over at KMG, Keep Music Going, and also the Final Percent. They're the ones that put the event on. Very, very unique event. I'm going to try to give you a little sample of it, but just imagine going to a personal growth event where, first of all, top-notch speakers. I mean, Sharon Lecter was there, Tim Story, all of these just rock stars out there that everybody just consumes on a regular basis. They're all there, but then mixed up into it, which I believe they call edutainment, is you've got all these just amazingly talented musicians and all of this stuff that performed a full-on concert. So not just like an after party, but this after party was performed by the speakers. So just unbelievable experience. And they actually it's actually live and you can go get it. I just looked it up on iTunes and it's called Purple Explosion. And it was just amazing. We got to see it live. I mean, like really, really good quality stuff live. But my favorite song was done by Greg Kimball, Hollywood as well. And then this guy, Ben Harris, who I just met, who's just an amazing, just powerhouse real estate guys. This one is called Path. So make sure you look up this album. I'm going to try to play it for you right now. Just a little soundbite from it, but make sure you go to iTunes on all the platforms. It's called The Purple Explosion. Just amazing. So this is the Path. Just to give you an idea, this is Ben Harris singing, and he's this like rock star public speaker, but he also apparently is very talented. So just let's see if this works.
Ain't no witness possibilities, only see one outcome. Staying driven with my intuition in the driver's seat. If it ain't exactly what I want, I know it's what I need. Cause I feel it in my bones, deep inside my soul.
I mean, just imagine that. How cool is that? It was just so fun. So anyway, big shout out. All right, so let's get into the Rise Up. Very, very excited about everything that's happening. At this talk, I got to do for the first time just to play around with this new concept of and that's a big part of my book that's coming out, and that's moving along great. Really excited about it. But it was fun to interact with people as the Dragon and just talk about stuff that you guys listen to all the time here, but then get that live feedback. It's this one thing I can't see right now. I mean, I can see the people chiming in and commenting and liking and stuff like that. But then we have these 60,000 plus downloads a month. I don't hear from you guys unless you reach out. So please reach out. But when you're in a live crowd, you can actually see how people are getting things, if they make sense and things like that. And it just really worked well. So this is called Neither Here Nor There. And I always like to share with you where the motivation comes from, because what happens is I go through this process every morning, and I teach this in my book of journaling and then sharing it with you. I met an amazing speaker at this event named Katie Richardson. Look her up. She's amazing. Amazing story. But we were just talking about the idea of journaling and how you get these ideas, and if you don't write them down, they'll disappear into ether. But if you write them down and then take that journal entry and then share it on a platform, or, like I'm doing with you, that's when you really take ownership. So I'll go through a couple of things that I heard that motivated me to write. So anyway, one thing that I heard, actually, I heard this on my Peloton ride this morning. Just said, remember this: compared to what you've been through, the challenge that you see ahead of you right now is nothing. I love that idea. Look at the challenge. Look at the thing that you're worried about right now, the challenge, the obstacle in front of you, and just take a moment and just recognize what you've been through to get to where you're at right now. And look at that challenge, and you'll recognize it's nothing. Unbelievable what we've all been through. And then the other thing, I just came up with this. I was motivated by this. I wrote, today, your word is gold. So the 4 agreements, I love that book, be impeccable to your word. I think a lot of people are not impeccable to their word. And I think one of the things that screws that up is that we think that our word has to do with other people. I'm talking right now about the idea that your word has to do with you and the person in the mirror. So today, this is an affirmation or a decision. Today, your word is gold. And today, you'll give your word that you'll follow through to yourself. You'll give your word to yourself that you're going to follow through today. Hey, how about you follow through today? How about you just follow through? Every single thing that you learn and you hear about success stories, it all says the exact same thing. It just says, when you get scared, when you get confused, of course, you're going to feel the feels and you're going to think the thinks, and you're going to want to step away because that's the easy thing. But just follow through today, and everything in your life starts to change. So I give you permission for that. Okay. So this rise up, it was motivated by me just, as an antenna receiving things, but also it was motivated by me observing how little time, and I spoke about this a little bit at my talk, how little time we spend, how little time it takes to actually experience events in our lives, and then how little time it takes to actually fix them. So, you go through something today, typically we'll brush it under the carpet. And then at some point in your life, you have to deal with it and you get through it. So what I'm referencing now is in my observation, it's so fascinating how little time the event actually takes, and then how little time it takes when you flip a switch and you actually fix it, but how much time we spend thinking about and contemplating and being affected by those events, like childhood trauma, for instance. People typically don't go and unpack and deal with childhood trauma until they're adults. Think about that for a second. So that's what I'm saying. So if we spend the majority of our lives, this should frustrate you, but also take the blindfold off of this interesting concept and this perception. If we spend the majority of our lives in the muck and struggling, the whole personal growth. I was listening to all these personal growth speakers talk, and they all say the same thing. They all tell this story about how they struggled and then something happened and they flipped the switch. So that's what I'm talking about, how much time we spend in the struggle and how little time it takes to make a decision. But another perception I had is the only reason that personal growth and support groups and all of these programs and these, 10 steps to do this and my 15 steps to discipline, all of those things, the only reason they exist is because people are out there struggling. And the reason why they're struggling is because of something that happened that just took like a minute. And it just triggered this whole sequence of events. So the trick and if your goal is to have a fulfilled, joyful, calm life, the trick must be found, in the space between the actual event, the thing that triggers you, and then that eventual resolution when you just flip a switch and you make a decision to change. So otherwise, our lives lose meaning and we waste time. So my first goal today in this Rise Up is to just take the blindfold off and make us aware. That's the first step of the interface response system, as you'll see when it comes out, is just to become aware of why you are the way you are from our evolution and stuff, but also just become aware of things that you just are typically unconscious to. So otherwise, our lives lose meaning and then we waste time. I don't want anybody to waste time. So if you look at my story, I shared my story this weekend. It's a very, very, traumatic story of when I was about 28 years old, and I was just facing this just terrible moment where I wanted to kill myself at 28 years old, or I was contemplating ending my life at 28 years old. And that led me to go seek out a therapist. Thank God my mom and the people came to my rescue, because I was not stable at this time. I went from being the most confident, cocky person in the world to the most unstable, dark, depressed person. So what I experienced is I went to, and I won't tell the whole story. Maybe they'll show the video from the event. But what I experienced is by going to see a therapist and making a distinction that something happened when I was 11 years old that took 3 minutes. An event happened in my life when I was 11 that took 3 minutes start to finish. But then I proceeded to spend 17 years struggling inside, right? And what I mean by struggling inside is I developed, anxiety and panic and self-worth issues and all that stuff. And that caused so many problems for me. And I could say that I'm glad that I went through those things because it got me where I'm at. But my point is if you really think about it, the therapy session that resolved this by making this distinction took an hour, and the event 17 years prior took 3 minutes. So I spent 1 hour and 3 minutes actually experiencing the event and then resolving it. But I spent 17 years of my life dealing with it in a reactionary mode. So that's my point. So I'm fascinated with the idea of winning life right now and just uncovering that life can be won in the space between, in the muck, right? We say no mud, no lotus. So we have to go through the muck to get the win. But I just want to just make everybody aware that we're spending way, way too much time, wasting way too much time trying to find out how to get to this like 1 hour session where we're going to, so if we can figure things out, man, we're going to move forward. So my IRS system, interface response system, the whole concept of it is it's going to help people speed up the process and create a path of least resistance and maximum performance. Yet I see great value in learning how to live indifferently to the cause and the effect. So I want to talk about the space between. I just said live indifferently, to be impartial, which is the topic of my next Rise Up. Indifferently to this or that, right? The cause or the effect. We always focus on, well, what's the cause? What's the effect, right? But what about the space between? That's where the most time is sucked up. So indifferent to the stimulus and the resolve, right? Viktor Frankl, one of his most profound things that he spoke about in A Man's Search for Meaning is that the win happens in between the stimulus, the thing, and our response, because that's where we have the opportunity to think first. And that's part of the interface response system, and create a more logical, rational response. So that space between is so powerful, but we spend a lot of time in the space between. So the IRS is going to be a steroid shot of sorts. It's not to cheat, but it's just to help people unblindfold themselves earlier so that they can get through that process faster, get the resolve faster, create a better, more efficient, effective response system, and move on to the next thing, right? Rather than spend the whole time in your life on that one thing. You know, it's interesting. I'm thinking about that amazing book, The One Thing. And I'm just realizing that a lot of people spend their entire life on that one thing. It's one thing to have one thing that is the most important thing. I get that. But what if you spend your entire life on that one thing that happened to you, right? And you just try to, and that's your purpose in life, is overcoming that. I don't think that that's what you're here for. I don't think your purpose in life is to spend your entire impermanent, unknown amount of time here, this blessing called life. I don't think that it was meant for you to just like try to overcome some terrible thing that happened to you. So finding meaning and value in living in the space between, that's what this Rise Up is about, where you're neither here nor there. Now, in Buddhism, they talk about this place called no man's land. And it's a really fun, I like to practice uncertainty. If you get my newsletter, I don't know when you're listening to this, either live or as a recording, but my newsletter in the week of the 27th of September, I talk about that stuff, and I just love the idea of recognizing that in this place of no man's land, and you're not connected to either side. It's just unbelievable how just calming that is to, and part of the cognitive distancing concept of when you say and you space yourself from the event. What happens is that you're not attached to either side. I think that we voluntarily cause most of our struggle. So this is super cool, because as I started to think about this, and I feel like my reticular system kind of activated, and I started to attract some things that I needed to hear. I saw something that Aristotle spoke about. Aristotle was a pretty smart dude. He talks about this concept called the golden mean. So that's a fun thing for you to look up and go Google that. The golden mean, MEAN. So Aristotle spoke very passionately about the value of one finding balance in their lives. Now, balance is, I don't know what I think about balance, right? Because balance, for me, I like the idea of accepting everything, but I think that balance, the concept, if you set a strategy and a goal to achieve balance, there's potential danger in it, because what it means is that, if you're having too good of a time, you have to expect that bad times are coming. That's not what I interpret from balance. I like to look at balance as a symphony, like it's not just one instrument. Everything is working together. They all have value. But if you're having a great day, you don't have to say, oh shit, something bad must be coming. So that's why you have to be careful with balance. I heard somebody say one day, the only time that you'll really ever achieve balance is when you're dead and you're underground. See, Wilma says, amazing how our past keeps impacting present lives. No need to stay stuck in that past. Right. Well said, Wilma. So Aristotle spoke very, very passionately about this idea of finding balance, that space between excess, listen to this, that space between excess and lacking, where we are not hung up only on one side. We get hung up on one side. You see this all over social media. I spoke about this in my last episode called Opinionation. Just the idea that an opinion is you taking a stance on the one side that you see. If you're creating an opinion, you're probably spending more time on your side than the other side, So this begins with an understanding of how the universe always provides two sides. Interesting to think about how the universe provides us. When I say it provides us, it means it's there for a reason. Provides us with two sides to every experience. So there's always a positive side and then a negative one. both equally important. So there's that symphony, that radical acceptance of the duality of the polar sides of everything, both equally important and valuable, as without one side, the other would cease to exist. Now, I love to do that. When something comes up that is like preposterous, when somebody does something really mean, when somebody attacks me, when I see somebody just completely unconsciously posting just stuff and they're not thinking about the other side, the way that I can express empathy for the worst of the worst things is I can always say, and this is a Buddhist principle, without the dark, I would not even know to appreciate the light. So, they're both equally important because without one, the other wouldn't exist. But by radically accepting the constant duality of both recognizing the fact that we also possess the ability to create a perception that only one side exists based on our perception. So this is really interesting. Human beings have this amazing ability to create a perception that only one side of a coin exists. That's why they create an opinion and create a stance behind their opinion. So because of our evolutionary wiring, we can have a tendency to perceive that we are having a good day or a bad day. As a matter of fact, if I asked you, this is where the concept of great morning started, because I started to notice it was funny that people would either say they were having a good day or a bad day, but in the morning, typically people would say good morning, right? And then I started to ask myself, well, why only good, right? If you have the opportunity to just call it great, and then people say, well, what if it's not great? But I don't ever hear somebody greet each other in the morning by saying bad morning to you, right? So most people are bullshitting when they say good morning. So I figured if everybody's bullshitting, I'm just going to take it to the next level and just say great morning. That's how great morning started. Somebody the other day came to me and they said, hey, good morning. Oh no, they said great morning because they listened to my podcast. They said, great morning, Dragon. And I said, I think so, right? I agree. So by radically accepting this duality of both, recognizing the fact that we also possess the ability to create a perception of one side existing. Because of our evolutionary wiring, we can have a tendency to perceive that we're having a good day or a bad day. So on the perceived good day, so here's the one side. Remember, we're talking about the space between today. On the perceived good day, the fantasy lies in not recognizing that a bad day still coexists. And we've just blocked it from our virtual reality suit. Now, if you haven't been following my podcast, whenever I say virtual reality suit, I'm just referring to the fact that it's an analogy for the six senses that we have. We all have this virtual reality suit, and we use our senses to create our reality by receiving it. So that's what we have this tendency to do when we're having a good day. We shut off our senses and our perception of the bad day, but it's still there. We have great abilities to do this to the extent where we feel we're having a good year or decade. Think about that. I mean, I could probably show you how I had great morning, Facebook user. I could probably show you how even like during the decade that the towers came down, or even during this time where we had this pandemic, this just unprecedented pandemic, I could easily show you how I had an amazing experience. Our coaching business, for example, like more than doubled. Our physical, our mental, and our financial, our relationship completely leveled up during one of the worst times ever for people. So that's my point. So, all of the struggle, the suffering, and the challenges are happening while I'm claiming that I have a good day. So it could be a fantasy that I say, yeah, it's great. Everything's great. We had a great year. We had a great decade. But what I mean by that is that's what I'm seeing right now. That's what I'm experiencing, right? So this can work the other way for a person that's depressed and feels that they're having a bad day or going through a rough patch. Have you ever gone through a rough patch, right? Going through a rough patch. You'll know because usually it's attached to being overwhelmed. That's when somebody will offer you some sort of a gift or a blessing of help, and you'll say it's not a good time, right? Whenever we say it's not a good time, you're going through some sort of a rough patch. But when your perception is telling you, because remember what I'm saying right now is we get attached to either the excess or the lacking, right? Good or bad. So if we learn that there's this space between that, we waste most of our time. Because remember, if you say you're having a good day or a bad day, you're just taking these little fine points of things that have happened and labeling your reality based on them. But all the time that you're spending claiming that, there's so much just value and gold in there. So once again, they've lost sight of the silver lining when you say you're having a bad day and your ability to express gratitude for the good. Why do you think gratitude is so important, right? I mean, one of the things that I always do is as soon as I move from unconscious to conscious in the morning, I've been practicing this for years. This is one of the greatest words of advice I could ever give you if you want to have a good day or create the perception of a good day. But the first thing I do when I go from unconscious to conscious, meaning my eyes open, I don't know what happens before, right? I'm having these dreams and stuff. But when I actually my computer boots up, first words out of my mouth are thank you. And the reason why I do that is I just figure, why don't I take the first blank canvas moment of my day and start with gratitude? Now, when I say thank you, I typically start off by being thankful that I can breathe and my heart's beating. I get another shot. I get a do-over, right, on this borrowed time. But then I say it again and then I go, thank you. And I do a thank you roundup and I actually consciously start thinking, thank you for chicken. Thank you for my kids. Thank you for opportunity, all that stuff, right? So remember, if you think that you're having a bad day, you've lost sight of the good. And that's why gratitude is important. Gratitude is the super highway to the present moment. And in the present moment, you have the ability to see what you have, not what you have not. So calling this space between, this, I wrote something, and sometimes that happens when I journal is I don't know what I wrote. So calling this space between and using concepts like balance and radical acceptance is great. Yet the problem is that what does this say? Yet it worries those that feel that it's crucial to obsess about your goals and staying focused on. Okay, here's what's interesting about that. We get worried about living in the space between, especially when we're going after something. Now, this is a really interesting concept, and it's attached to the concept of being obsessed. So if I want to go after something, I interviewed Doug Wood, amazing individual, finding super great success on many levels, physical, mental, financial. And we were talking about, can you get by in life being mediocre? And then we both agreed that if you want to make something happen, you have to become obsessed with it. But what's interesting about that is that's one of the polar sides, right? So if you're obsessed with something, I get why you need to do that, but you're living on one of those sides, and it prevents you. So obsessed people, what do they struggle with, right? Is chilling out and relaxing, because the concept on that side of excess is that, you know, they struggle taking a day off. They say, no, I'm not going to take a day off. I'm going to take a day on and stuff like that. So there's, no matter what your reality is, whether you're living a mediocrity, a life of mediocrity right now, or you're in that like full on accelerated, moving forward, obsessed version of yourself, the struggle could be the same, because what you're doing is not acknowledging the other side. I think the real win is when you're in between being obsessed and being depressed, making use of that time. I mean, really, if you look at your timeline, where do you spend most of your life? It's in the space between these decisions and these runs and these backups. You know, whenever I meet somebody that, you know, one of the things that we do is we help people with a physical transformation, because I feel that that's, you know, on a healthy body rests a healthy mind. So a lot of people, they start off like that. But I noticed that none of them ever made a decision to get unhealthy. So I always say, what happened? And they tell me about this thing that happened, this one event. So there's that little event that triggers, and they say, and then I gained weight and I got depressed over 5-6 years. But now I made a decision to go after my dreams and go after my goals, right? So we put them on our program and we get them in motion. But 5 years, 6 years, sometimes 20 years. We always ask people what your goal is in health. We say, what's your goal? And they say, I want to lose 60 pounds and I want this, 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 and this. And I go, when's the last time you felt like that? And they'll tell us, and then I'll go, what happened? Right? And they'll tell us about this one event that happened, and they just spent like 5, 10, 15, 20 years struggling. So you see what I'm saying, right? And we have the ability, like I said before, if you're in struggle mode and you're a victim, right? Your brain just buys into that and says, that's my reality. And then you start doing the whole, I'll do the best that I can with what I got. But then 15 years later, you make this one decision and all of a sudden you lose your weight and you get in great shape and everything's great. Wouldn't it be cool if you could do that a day earlier or 15 years earlier, right? So that's what we're talking about. That's what the IRS is about. So there's great value in this indeed. Yet when the shit hits the fan, this is one of the sticky points. When the shit hits the fan, that person, can crash hard. And that's what I'm talking about, that obsessed person. So one of the things that I've noticed, I remember when I met one of my mentors, Larry Markson, he taught me a valuable lesson that, like in his experience, whenever he would meet somebody that was always optimistic and just going after things, he would always, try not to tell them, but he would always say something like, oh, that person's going to hit a wall. Right. And the reason why he noticed that is because they didn't have a response system to the shit hitting the fan. That's one of the downsides of being obsessed and going after things. The upside is that you crush your goals. The downside is you never really probably took the time to think about what you do when the shit hits the fan, when the floor falls out beneath you. So when the shit hits the fan, the person can crash hard. So the individual that practices seeking the golden mean, this is Aristotle's thing, seeking the golden mean and radically accepting both sides has an easier time, for instance, learning the failures and learning about or learning from failures, right? When we say, hey, there's no such thing as failures, those are opportunities to learn. That's somebody that understands both sides. That's a very healthy thing to do. And then it also helps them understand and practice empathy towards people that try to steal your flow. Isn't that interesting? If you can learn how to live in the space between and say, it's all good. Hey, Dragon, how's it going? And I say, it's all good, right? So I practice that sometimes. It's my way of practicing indifference. But we have these people in our lives called flow burglars. They're unconsciously trying to steal your flow so that it'll elevate their value in life. But if you're like following that obsessive one-sided thing, you good or bad, a flow burglar can have a lot of impact on you. But if you live in between and understand the value of everything, remember that Buddhist principle, a flow burglar will come and you'll go, oh, you poor thing. You give him a hug. You say, come here, flow burglar. Let me give you a hug, and I just want to say I appreciate the effort of you trying to steal my flow right now. Thanks, but no thanks. But, it's people like you that make me understand the polar opposite of people that try to lift me up. So I want to thank you for that. And then the other thing is that when I'm looking at the people on the other side that lift me up, I want to say, first of all, I want to thank you for your support, but at the same time, I want to also say that you've really helped highlight the flow burglars and help me understand, what they're doing. So anyway, the space between is really cool. So this concept of accepting and acknowledging both sides exists in duality. Existing in duality may make sense, yet pose a difficult challenge to the individual that has been victimized by spending too much time consuming the negative or only choosing to see the dark side of the moon. Folks, I think, one of the most powerful things I ever heard was one of my mentors, Dr. Wayne Scott Anderson. And he just talks about, he thinks that the number one problem in our world is emotional mismanagement. That's kind of like one of the triggers that got me moving and, looking to create the interface response system. But what I can see is that it doesn't have to be that way. And one of the number one struggles that people are unconscious to. It's just what they consume. I was looking at this guy that I know. He's a great guy, but he's just totally caught up in like conspiracy theories and all that stuff. And I have no opinion on that because I don't have an opinion on it. You know, I'm neither here nor there with it. But what I can see is that, you know, he's spending too much of his time consuming that stuff, which is why he keeps doing it, and he's unconscious to it. And what's funny about those people is because you want to put your cape on and save them, but if you say something to them like, hey man, I noticed this about you, you know, oh man, then you're going to become part of the problem. It's like a kid that's having a night terror. You're supposed to just guide them back to bed and let them go to sleep. But if you try to talk to a kid having a night terror, you become a part of the nightmare. So if somebody is like consuming on a regular basis negative stuff and watching news and propaganda, typically one side of the coin is what they're consuming. Well, of course, that's the side of the coin that's going to be their whole existence. But I'm watching and I'm saying, man, this dude's been doing this for 6 years. And I know at some point he's going to wake up and he's going to go, man, that was a waste of time, right? Because it's not even under my control and all that stuff. Oh, there you go. I just creeped out an opinion about it. But my point is that at some point, he's going to recognize that he does. That's not what his goal is in life, is to be upset, right? So very, very interesting to observe and pick people out that you can see that are one-sided, living in this one side, wasting all that time, but once again, triggered by an event, triggered by a teeny little minuscule amount of time on their whole impermanent lifetime. So fascinating. So in Viktor Frankl's book, which I've read it 3 times now, and just so many nuggets in there, A Man's Search for Meaning, he spoke about, this is really interesting, he spoke about the feelings that prisoners, remember Viktor Frankl was one of the very, very few that was in the Auschwitz Nazi death camp, interesting way to say it, right? And he survived, right? So, you know, he's got this interesting point of view because he's found a way to seek meaning in life even after going through that. You want to talk about a victim status? You know? I mean, some of us think that, you know, like somebody says something mean to us and we go and we make like 15-year run dealing with that. You know, imagine being in a Nazi death camp, you know. So anyway, here's what he says. He speaks about the feelings that prisoners of the death camp had when they were liberated. Right now, remember, we're talking about the amount of time that it takes on either side and how powerful these little moments can be. So basically, this moment where this little handful of people out of the millions, they said, hey, the war's over, you're free. So he explained that the prisoners were surprisingly displeased when they were released and liberated, surprisingly displeased with the feeling, as they had trouble believing that the world had truly decided to welcome them back into existence. So he refers to a reality called depersonalization. And what depersonalization is, remember I was telling you about these people on social media, they're spending years and years on one side, you know, in this negative, in this just consuming. I mean, I don't want to relate that to a Nazi death camp, but you can become depersonalized where we can actually lose ourselves in a reality to the point that when the other side comes, it's not something that you now accept exists as a possibility. We know that when people come out of prison and they've been there so long, they don't know how to act and survive out there. So they'll do something to get back in prison. So, you know, why do I share that? Well, if you find yourself living on one side, you can get to the point where it'll be a very, very big challenge for you to accept that the other side exists. You know, one of the things about being open and curious, which is where growth takes place, right? You cannot grow thinking that you know everything. The growth takes place in the unknown, the space neither here nor there. So, you know, what's interesting about being above the line and being open is it requires you to know and just consider another side. But if you've been depersonalized because you've spent so much time below the line, you actually think that you're right about your one side to the point where you will no longer accept any other side. That's a dangerous place to be. You know, what will it say on that person's tombstone? Which we don't know when that will come, right? It'll say he was right, and that's it. Life over, no legacy, nothing. Nobody's ever going to leave a legacy for being right, right? The legacy that you're going to leave that's powerful and impactful is going to come from being open. So the individual that's spent a lot of time, even in their mental prison, there must be a period of transitional reacclimation. So that's why I have to be patient and accepting. People need time. If somebody is just spending so much time on one side or the other, and then all of a sudden they realize that that's not working out for them, they have to be patient. And if you're the person that's guiding them, you have to be patient as well, because it's going to take time to reacclimate to the other side before it can be accepted. So that's my last point there is, I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope that it stimulates something for you today and helps you, even just for this little jacuzzi experience, this eye of the hurricane moment, gives you the ability to have your blindfold taken off to something. You'll probably put it back on just because you need some time to think about it. And I'll be patient because I know you have to reacclimate. But if you do get this, your whole life will change. Whole life will change if you just start answering that question. Yeah, it's all good. And start recognizing that if you looked at your timeline of life, there's just these teeny little things that happened that you've spent your whole life dealing with, good or bad. So that space between, we typically spend asleep and unconscious. So if you wake up, you'll see that there's just gold and diamonds everywhere, in that moment. So love and appreciate you. This has been another Rise Up. Just remember, we've got a great newsletter that comes out on Mondays. Just go to riseupwithdragon.com, fill out the sign up for the eventuality of the 15 days of discipline, and you'll get put on the newsletter, or subscribe to the newsletter on the website. You'll love that. You can follow me on Instagram, Rise Up with Dragon, on LinkedIn. This is going live on LinkedIn. So hello, everybody out there. And then our podcast is on iTunes, and we'd love when you subscribe, give us some feedback. We want to know if it makes sense. And on Clubhouse, that makes sense is my handle on Clubhouse. So love and appreciate you all. Have an amazing day. And this has been fun.